Endowment lecture.
This meeting is being recorded.
Usha, I think I'll start again. Shall I?
Yes, please. Yes.
So good evening. As chairperson of the Endowment Lectures Committee of the Asiatic Society of Mumbai, it is my privilege to welcome you to the 24th Gulestan and Rustom Billimoria Endowment Lecture. We have the honor of having as our speaker today the eminent professor, archaeologist, and former Vice Chancellor of Deccan College in Pune, Professor Dr. Vasant Shinde. He will give us a lecture on recent archaeogenetic research on peopling and early genetic dispersal in South Asia, a subject that has been of great interest to us in recent times. I thank you, Professor Shinde, for accepting our invitation. We look forward to a learned discourse. Shri Sanjeev Sanyal, Principal Economic Advisor to the Government of India, has kindly consented to be in the chair. We are indeed grateful to him. Just today, the papers have announced that he is now a full-time member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister. We congratulate you on this appointment, Mr. Sanyal, and thank you for being here with us today. I would like our Honorary Secretary, Dr. Usha Vijay Lakshmi, to introduce the speaker and the chair. She has been a student of archaeology and is now a professor of history. She knows Professor Shinde well and has been in contact with him over many years. Before I hand over the mic to you, Usha, I would like to speak briefly about Gulestan Rustom Billimoria, a leading woman educationist who very kindly has given this endowment to the Asiatic Society. So Gulestan Rustom Ji Billimoria was born in the Parsi family in Bombay in the year 1898. She had her early school education in the Girton High School and then joined St. Xavier's College, Bombay, from where she passed the BA as well as the MA examination, both in the first class. Her first job as a teacher was in the well-known Alexander Girls' English Institution. She was the first Indian lady superintendent and headmistress of the school from 1922 to 1936. Later, she was nominated director of the school and worked on the board for nearly 34 years. In 1928, she was a delegate from Bombay at the All India Women's Conference on Educational Reforms. In the same year, she presided at the Indian Musical Conference. The next year, she traveled to Geneva as a delegate at the conference of the International Federation of University Women. In 1936, she had married the well-known physician of Bombay, Dr. Rustomji Billimoria, founder of the Bel Air Hospital of the Indian Red Cross Society. He was later to be a recipient of the Padma Bhushan. Mrs. Billimoria was a great lover of music and painting, both of which she excelled at. This led her to being selected by the London Trinity College of Music to study Western music and cultural art. Her hard work culminated in her being declared a licentiate of the London Trinity College of Music. A talented artist, her paintings were exhibited at various exhibitions of the Art Society of Bombay, Simla, and Madras. With Shri K.T. Shah, she jointly authored the much acclaimed work titled The Constitution, Function and Finance of the Indian Municipality and Government of India. For Billimoria, education was a lifelong activity. Towards this end, she played an active role in the management of various educational, social, and charitable institutions, such as the Ratan Tata Institute, the Indian Red Cross, the Women Graduates Union, the Bharat Scouts and Guides, and the Maharashtra State Women's Council. She wrote a number of articles on children with special needs and helped found the Savera Special School of the MSWC. She was elected a fellow of the Mumbai University, a syndic, and a member of the Academic Council of the University. Recognizing her outstanding abilities, she was appointed Sheriff of Bombay in 1957, as well as Chief Executive Magistrate. She is also the secretary of the Subcommittee on Female Education of the National Planning Commission. In recognition of her immense contribution to education and social work, she was awarded the Padma Shri, and in 1972, the Padma Bhushan was conferred on her. And so now it's over to you, Usha. Kindly introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Meenal. Good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure and an honor to introduce both Professor Shinde and Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal today. Professor Vasant Shinde was the former professor and Vice Chancellor of the Deccan College from 2013 to 2019, which is a deemed university in Pune. He is a founding Director General of the National Maritime Heritage Complex, Gandhinagar, and presently he is a CSIR Bhatnagar Fellow at the Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology, Hyderabad. He is a world-renowned archaeologist and one of the foremost scholars in South Asia. Professor Shinde is also adjunct professor at the National Institute of Advanced Studies, IIC campus, Bangalore, and Central University of Haryana. Professor Shinde obtained his BA in History from the University of Pune and Master's degree in Ancient Indian History and Culture and Archaeology from Deccan College. He subsequently completed his PhD in Protohistoric Archaeology on early settlements in Central Tapiri Basin from the same university. He has completed postdoctoral research from the University of Cambridge and the International Research Center for Japanese Studies, Kyoto, Japan. Professor Shinde has been conferred with honorary D.Litt degree from Vikramshila Hindi University. Professor Shinde has been teaching postgraduate course in archaeology since 1982. He has supervised 55 MA, PG diploma and MPhil students and 39 PhD scholars. Professor Shinde has been a pioneer in archaeological research since the last 43 years, specializing in the proto-history of South Asia, maritime history, as well as field archaeology. He has completed 16 major research projects, in the process of which he has collaborated with scholars and institutes from around the world. He has been acting as field director in many excavations since 1990, from the Harappan sites in Gujarat and Haryana to the Chalcolithic sites in Madhya Pradesh and the Deccan, to proto-historic and early historic sites in Rajasthan and Maharashtra. The most famous being Rakigadi in Haryana, where DNA analysis and craniofacial reconstruction of Harappan people have been done. Professor Shinde has delivered no less than 300 special lectures in different parts of India and 51 in institutes abroad. He is a member of 21 national and international academic bodies. I would like to make a special mention of Society of South Asian Archaeology, which he established, where I got a chance to interact with him. His contributions to archaeology in India and abroad, excuse me. I think there is a disturbance here. Yeah.
You can carry on.
Yeah, his contributions to archaeology in India and abroad take the form of a large number of research papers, edited volumes, and other publications comprising of 12 books, 2 monographs, 19 edited books and journals, 135 papers in national journals and books, 75 research papers in international journals, in addition to 24 popular articles in magazines and other periodicals. This research paper on the DNA of the Harappan people was declared by the International Conference on Genomics as one of the 9 breakthrough researchers in the world in 2019. Professor Shinde has vast administrative experience. He has been conferred many honors and awards, 3 of the most noteworthy ones being 100 most influential vice chancellors by the World Education Congress, Devang Mehta National Education Award for Outstanding Contribution to Education, and the New Makers Achievers by the media. We are happy to have you with us today. Now I will introduce Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, who is the chair of today's session. Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal is currently the member of Economic Advisory Council of the Prime Minister. He was still yesterday Principal Economic Advisor to the Government of India and also represents India on a number of international forums. As a co-chair of G20 Framework Working Group, he has been one of the main architects of G20 Global Action Plan, which is to coordinate the global response to COVID-19 pandemic. Prior to joining the government in February 2017, he spent over 2 decades in financial sector and was global strategist and managing director at Deutsche Bank. He was named Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum in 2010. Shri Sanyal is also well known as an urban theorist and writer. In 2007, he was awarded Eisenhower Fellowship for his work on urban dynamics. He has been a visiting scholar at the Oxford University, adjunct fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies, Singapore, a senior fellow of the Worldwide Fund for Nature, a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, London, and an honorary professor of Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. In 2015-16, he served in the Future City Subcommittee of Singapore government, tasked with the building of a long-term vision for the city-state. Shri Sanyal attended Sri Ram College of Commerce, Delhi, and Oxford University, where he was Rhodes Scholar. His best-selling books include Land of the Seven Rivers, The Indian Renaissance, India in the Age of Ideas, and The Ocean of Church, all published by Penguin. In addition, he has published around 200 articles, columns, and reports in leading national and international publications. Welcome to our session, Mr. Sanyal. I request you to take over from me now.
Thank you, Usha-ji. Let me begin by saying that I'm very grateful to the Asiatic Society of Mumbai to allow me to chair the 24th Gulestan and Rustom Billimoria Endowment Lecture. We had to, of course, do it online this year, but I really do hope that we will be able to do this in subsequent years in what I believe is a lovely refurbished hall in Mumbai. So hopefully next year's one will be done live. But nevertheless, I'm very, very pleased to chair a session where a dear friend of mine, Professor Shinde, will be speaking. He, as you said, has a very distinguished career as an archaeologist and more importantly, a thinker who has revolutionized the way we think about ancient India. And so I love my long chats with him whenever he is in Delhi, and he always makes some time for me. So I am really pleased to hear about what he will have to say. But let me say that he will be talking about the archaeogenetics of the Indian subcontinent, which is, of course, an extremely contested area. Sadly, for a long time, this became a preserve of almost ideologically driven debates. But thanks to the likes of Professor Shinde using and his use of much more scientific methods, including new archaeological finds and, of course, applying genetic research on it, we have begun to have a much more scientific approach to this. Now, this is, of course, still work in play, and we will learn a lot more over time. But nevertheless, because of people like Professor Shinde, we have a much more scientific and systematic approach to understanding what is a very long and complex history, which doesn't just relate to today's India, but because of all the migrations that have happened over the centuries and millennia, has had tremendous impact on the genetic composition of the world. So without further ado, let me request Professor Shinde, over to you for the presentation.
Thank you very much, my friend Sanjeev Sanyalji. Also, congratulations for your new assignment, and we hope that you will certainly flourish there also. I take this opportunity to thank the organizers, particularly Usha-ji, Meenal-ji, for inviting me to deliver this very prestigious Gulestan and Rustom Billimoria Endowment lecture. I'm indeed, overwhelmed by their gesture. It is really, a great honor to me and to my institute, where I worked. So today, as Sanjeev just mentioned, I am going to discuss about the most vexing issues, in fact, in Indian history. And I've been working on this particular issue for last almost 1.5 decade. And after a long toil, we have succeeded finally in generating the most scientific data in this respect. So I will start with my presentation. I'm going to share this presentation with you. And with the help of slides, I'm going to discuss my lecture today. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Yes, sir, we can see that.
Okay, the topic of my presentation today is recent archaeogenetic research on peopling and early genetic dispersal in South Asia. Now, here I am going to discuss three important evidences that we have generated recently: the archaeological evidence, the genetic evidence, and also the craniofacial reconstruction that we have done for the Harappan people. So we are not really relying only on one source, but these are the three important sources. And the final ultimate results indicate, that there is a local development happening in Indian subcontinent. But before that, I will also mention that, the Harappan civilization was discovered exactly 100 years ago. And the most important significance of the discovery of the Harappan civilization in Indian subcontinent was that it was not that it was one of the greatest ancient civilizations of the world, contemporary to Mesopotamians and Egyptians. But before the discovery of the Harappan civilization, it was thought by many historians that there's a big gap in the history of South Asia. Uh, it is mentioned by one of these scholars like Vincent Smith that India jumps from Stone Age to the Stupa period or the Buddhist period, and there's a big hiatus, cultural hiatus in the history of India, South Asia. That was the view of most of the scholars earlier. But with the discovery of the Harappan civilization, the settled life in this part was pushed back by almost 3,000, 3,500 years at one stroke. And now India boasts of a continuous history for last almost for 2 million years. The earliest stone tools discovered in Indian subcontinent are dated to almost 2 million years, that is 20 lakhs. And from 20 lakhs till the present, we have continuous history. Perhaps India is one of the few, countries in the world where, we have such a continuity in the history. Perhaps China, to some extent, has this continuity. So this was the most important, significance of the discovery of the Harappan civilization, exactly, 100 years ago. And over the period, but last, 100 years, we have been, toiling very hard in reconstructing various facets of the Harappan lifestyle, including the town planning and, maybe various other aspects. But exactly after 100 years, a major breakthrough has come in the Harappan research. And in 2019-20, we have discovered that, the Harappans were actually the local people. There was a lot of debate about who are the Harappan people, whether they are indigenous people or they came from outside. So that particular issue is now properly settled. We have scientific evidence in that particular respect, and I'm going to discuss that. I'm going to explain this particular hypothesis on the basis of the archaeological data that we have generated, the genetic data and craniofacial data that we have generated. And from this data, one can understand the continuity in the history of South Asia. Now, some of the earlier issues in Indian history were the Aryan invasion or migration. Some people say that the Aryans came from outside, they invaded and they pushed back some of the people from North India to South India. Also, maybe some scholars say that maybe there was a migration of the Aryans from outside, India. So that theory is still prevalent till this particular data was generated. Then also a lot of debate was about the people, who are the people responsible for the cultural developments in South Asia. Also, we are still debating about the Vedic culture and Indo-European language, etc. So these are some of the important issues, vexing issues in Indian history. And certainly with this new research, this is the beginning of the new scientific research. And more we deal this type of we develop these type of researches in the country. More and more we generate data. I'm sure that we'll be able to shed sufficient light on the Vedic culture and Indo-European language also. And the work that we have done in fact at the site of Rakhigarhi. Now there are some important contributions of this particular research. One is that we have also established that Rakhigarhi was the largest Harappan city located almost in the middle of the Saraswati basin. So that that this particular issue has been uh, you know almost established on the basis of the application of the latest geophysical instruments at the site of Rakhigarhi and the geophysical research at the site of Rakhigarhi. Then also we have also tried to establish the proper chronological framework for this particular culture. And now we know that the beginning of the Harappan culture is now going back to almost 6000 BCE. There are series of dates which fall between 6000 and 5500 BC. So maybe 5500 BC or maybe 6000 BC is the beginning of the Harappan culture. And earlier, before this particular discovery, most of the people believe that believe that the origin of the Harappan culture happened in fact in the Indus plain somewhere, and then gradually people started dispersing and they occupied the regions like Saraswati, Gujarat, parts of Rajasthan, etc. But now it is not, that is not the case. The earliest beginning is certainly in fact in the, in this particular region. But we don't claim that, that origin of the Harappan civilization has taken place in the Saraswati basin. There may be some sites which are quite, just excuse for a minute only. Sorry for this disturbance. So now we can certainly say that there was no nuclear zone as such. The development was happening simultaneously, and we believe that there may be some sites in the Saraswati, in the Indus basin also, which could be as old as the sites we have found here. Maybe those sites have been not tapped yet, but this is the new data that we have generated in respect to the beginning of the urban culture. And also we have also studied, we have also understood the transformation of the Harappan culture into Harappan civilization. From 6000 BCE to 2600 BCE, there is a continuous development happening, transformation, and the same transformation has culminated into the formation of the Harappan civilization or the urban phase of the Harappan culture. So these are some of the important breakthrough researches that we have done at the site of Rakhigarhi. And as far as the Aryan issue is concerned, of course, there are a number of hypotheses. But let me tell you that most of the hypotheses related to Aryans were based on mere inferences, only hypotheses, and they were not really based on any scientific or any archaeological data earlier. But now, for the first time, of course, we have generated this data, and we can certainly talk about this particular issue. The Aryan issue began, in fact, in almost in 1583, when Filippo Sassetti, one of the travelers from Italy, he studied the Indian language, and he was fascinated, that there is so much similarity between Indian language and Italian languages. So, he was of the opinion that perhaps they both the languages have maybe common roots of origin. So that is how the comparison started in at that time. Then William Jones, the founder of the Asiatic Society in Bengal, in 1784, he was very impressed, in fact, by Sanskrit language. And he also found a lot of similarity between Sanskrit language and Gothic and Celtic languages. And he also suggested that, all the languages have common root, common base. And that is how, this particular, issue started. And then Thomas Young in 1813, he for the first time proposed the term Indo-European for the language. In 1840, of course, German linguist Max Müller, now when he was studying the linguistic text, he came across two words. One was Arya, the other was Dashu. And it was mentioned that, Aryans were quite advanced. So, most of the colonial historians, they always thought that, the Indians cannot be so advanced. So those people have to be from outside. That is how the Aryan term was introduced by him first. But also, most of the scholars, who strongly propound that Aryans came from outside, they use his earlier version. But Max Muller also later, in fact, he changed his opinion. And later he thought that, that Aryan is not racial, but it is a linguistic term. So that, nobody, hardly any scholar really talks about this. Then, of course, this particular issue was fostered very strongly by the British colonial government. And they always suggested that, the superior Aryan race, in fact, moved into India from Europe, maybe through steppe and Iranian region to Indian subcontinent. So this how the Aryan issue started. And the British government had, of course, they, of course, used this particular issue for their own political benefit, political gain. And certainly, they succeeded to some extent. The theories, of course, regarding the date of the Aryans, there are different opinions about the date of the Aryans. Some say that maybe like, Lokmanya Tilak, he, puts it out at around 6,000 BCE. There are some scholars who believe that perhaps, the Aryans or this particular issue started maybe around 3000 BCE. But majority of the historians agreed that perhaps the Aryans, so-called Aryans, began to come into Indian subcontinent in 15th century BCE, because there is an inscription found at a place called Boğazköy in Turkey. And in that inscription, in the treaty that happened between Hittite and Mitannis, there is a mention of the Vedic gods like Indra, Varun, Agni. So historians thought that, these Vedic gods, in fact, originated in that part. And later, when these people moved into Indian subcontinent, they brought this element into Indian subcontinent. And that is how, this particular date is accepted by most of the scholars. So as I mentioned that, most of the, theories about the Aryan invasion are based on very flimsy ground. Either they are misconception, as it happened with the earlier scholars, or it is a mischief, as was done by the British, colonial government. And also maybe to some extent is a misinterpretation of data, particularly from the Vedic text. Then I would like to cite, the hypothesis or the evidence that was used by Sir Mortimer Wheeler for suggesting that the Aryans came from outside and the Harappans were the Dravidian people. In fact, in the upper part of the site of Mohenjo-daro, some skeletal remains were found. I will come to that because I'm going to show that particular evidence. But I will talk a little bit about the research approaches and the limitations that we have. Now, this entire research was planned by Indian scholars. Most of the data was generated by Indian scholars. The DNA research was done by Indian scholars, and it was a multidisciplinary, multi-institutional research. Deccan College, the government of Haryana, and also CCMB, they were involved in carrying out this particular research. So initially we had planned this research, among ourselves, and we had completed our research, and then we were about to publish. At one stage we were about to publish our data, but then I realized that if we publish this data, perhaps only by Indian scholars, then there will be a lot of criticism from the scholars from Europe and America, and they will always try to find some faults in our research. So what we did in fact, we prepared 3 libraries of the data, 3 sets of the libraries. So one, of course, was analyzed by us. One we supplied to the, the biggest ancient DNA lab in Harvard Medical School, and the third samples were provided to the scientists in medical school in Seoul National University. And after we got the results from them, we did not really reveal them, what kind of results we have. We already had results, we already had interpretations with us, but we were waiting for the results from these two different scientists. And after we got the results from them, which are quite complementary to our results, then we decided to publish this. So this is what we did in fact. And then of course we have some a minor erring, or minor maybe the erring in our hypothesis made in fact in the 2 papers that we published in Shale and Science. There we mentioned that after 2000 BCE, the Indo-European people began to come into Indian subcontinent. Now there is a lot of debate about the Indo-European language, Indo-European people. So that was the mistake in fact, slight mistake that we did. It was not a mistake in fact. Now we wanted to suggest that after 2000 BCE, there was more in fact interaction between maybe Central Asia, Iran, and Indian subcontinent. That interaction began to increase, but that was misinterpreted by some scholars, by some individuals, as the wrong conclusions from our side. Also, we were also blamed that it is a politically oriented research, and we wanted to maybe please the BJP government by publishing this particular research. But let me tell you that this particular research was started in 2006 at the site of Farmana, which I excavated before the site of Rakhigarhi. At Farmana, we discovered the largest cemetery, Harappan cemetery there, spread over an area of almost 4 hectares. And there, we excavated nearly 70 burials. But one of the objectives of our research at Farmana was to understand the people. And if you want to understand the people, then you have to have DNA. So we wanted to extract DNA from the skeletal remains we excavated at Farmana. But because of our maybe wrong research approach or the excavation method that we adopted, we could not succeed there. What we did in fact, we excavated all the burials at one and the same time. We did not take proper precaution because the modern DNA can get into ancient DNA easily. We did not take precaution that time because we had no precedence for this type of research before. This is the research which we began for the first time. So we wanted to develop this new methodology. And then later we realized that perhaps the approach that we adopted was wrong. We should have changed our approach, which we did in fact at the site of Rakhigarhi when we started excavating the cemetery there. And therefore we could succeed. So suppose we had succeeded in Farmana, which we started in 2006, we could have published this research maybe in 2009, 10 or 11, and the results would have been same. So it is wrong to say that it is politically oriented research. Secondly, we also are aware that the data that we have is very small. This is a very good beginning. The data is very small, so we are not really making big conclusions. We are only getting very strong indications, and those indications I'm going to speak to you today. So this is the data that that was found at the site of Mohenjo-daro in the upper levels, in the upper street at Mohenjo-daro. This belongs to around maybe 1900 BC. The excavators found number of skeletal remains, and this particular data was misinterpreted by Sir Mortimer Wheeler as the people who were killed by the invading Aryans. And these are the skeletal remains of those people. That was the argument made by Sir Mortimer Wheeler. And but later in point, this particular skeletal remains was scientifically studied, by one very well-known anthropologist. His name is Kenneth Kennedy. And Kennedy did not find any injury marks on the body of these people, of the skeletal remains. And his hypothesis that perhaps these people died probably due to suffocation, because they found in fact in the flood deposit, and the Indus River near the site of Mohenjo-daro has the history of floods. There are at least 3 events which have been recorded in the excavations at Mohenjo-daro. And every time there was a great flood at Indus, it has damaged a major portion of the Harappan city. But 2 floods happened in fact when the Harappan economy was booming, and the last flood happened maybe towards the end of the Harappan civilization, when the economy had started sliding and they were not really able to rebuild that particular city. So this data is certainly is not the data of the people who were killed by the Aryans, so-called Aryans. So in South Asia, of course, now the beginning of, as I mentioned, that the beginning of the Stone Age goes back to 2 million years, and it continues up to almost 10,000 or 10,000 BCE. We do not have much information about the people, in fact, during the Stone Age period. There is a hypothesis that the people from Africa began to move into Indian subcontinent sometime back during the prehistoric times, and they landed on maybe on the coastal part of India, and they got into inner part of India, and they this major portion of India or South Asia was occupied. So we have no data about the people of that particular period because they were hunter-gatherers and they were not really settled at one place. But from the beginning of the settled life, which goes back to 7,000 BCE, then we start getting the proper evidence about the people who are responsible for the development of agriculture, people who are responsible for the development of village life, and also at some stage the city life or the urban phase. So we have data about from this period onward, and certainly we have data for last 12,000 years, and the data which we have clearly indicates, both the archaeological data as well as the genetic data clearly indicates that there's a continuity in both genetic history as well as cultural history in South Asia for last 12,000 years. Suppose the Aryans had come from outside, if they had invaded, 2 things would have happened. Firstly, that they could have introduced a new genetic history, which has not happened at all. And secondly, when these people, when people of any culture move from one place to another place, they always carry cultural elements with them. So that has also not happened. We do not find any new cultural elements suddenly introduced into Indian subcontinent. But at the same time, I would also like to mention that right from the beginning of the settled life from 7,000 BC, the people from Indian subcontinent, they were interacting with people from outside world also. They were interacting with people from maybe Gulf region, from Persian Gulf region, also people from Central Asia also. So a lot of movement was happening. That movement is very well reflected in the cultural material and as well as the genetic history. We do find a lot of mixing. The genes of different people also mixed in the Harappan people. That is also quite clear. But the most dominant gene, of course, is the gene of the local people. As far as the beginning of the agriculture is concerned, initially it was thought that somewhere in West Asia, maybe in the Levant region, the agriculture originated, and from there, the agriculture technology or the people of that particular phase, they began to disperse in different parts of the world, and those people came to Indian subcontinent and they began agriculture in Indian subcontinent. But now the archaeological evidence from maybe from Indus River, from the South Asian sites, the evidence from Mesopotamia, from Egypt, from and also from China, clearly indicate that in these different regions, the beginning of agriculture happened independently, and maybe after the beginning of agriculture, then they started developing contacts with each other. So this development was happening independently in different regions, and so was also the case with South Asia. So here you can see the portion shown in red. That is the region occupied by the Harappan culture, Harappan civilization people. Quite, very extensive, right from this Iranian border down south up to Gujarat Maharashtra border, and from the western part of UP to Makran coast. So very huge area, almost 2 million square kilometer area. That is almost double the size of present Pakistan. That much area was occupied by the Harappans. And you can see here, very small area was occupied by the Sumerian or the Akkadian Mesopotamian culture here. And similarly, the upper, middle, and the upper reaches of the Nile, valley in Egypt were occupied by the Egyptian civilization. So certainly this was the most, extensive civilization in the contemporary world. And all these three civilizations had interaction with each other. This map shows you the area of the Harappans, also some of the important of almost 100 years. We have carried out very extensive research, extensive exploration, extensive excavations in different Harappan sites, and now we know that we had almost 2,000 Harappan sites which have been discovered. But one misunderstanding that every Harappan site is a city. That is not the case. There are only 5 Harappan cities. You can see here. Before the excavation of Rakhigarhi, Mohenjo-daro was thought to be the biggest Harappan city, followed by Harappa, then Rakhigarhi, Dholavira, and Ganveriwala. This was the sequence. But now we have the biggest Harappan cities, Rakhigarhi, followed by Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, Dholavira, and Ganveriwala. So these were the 5 Harappan cities. They were maybe dozen towns. The rest are in different categories. There's maybe village, maybe villages. There are manufacturing centers, Harappan ports, even semi-permanent settlements, etc. So these are the different categories of sites we find, and most of the data that is generated for the reconstruction of the Harappan lifestyle is from the Harappan cities. So at this stage now we have clear-cut idea about the life in the Harappan cities, but we do not have sufficient information about the holistic life of the Harappans, because we have not really generated sufficient data from different categories of the settlements. So unless we have data from different categories of settlements, we cannot claim that we know holistic history of the Harappans. So this is the maybe little drawback as far as the reconstruction of the Harappan culture, Harappan civilization is concerned. The Harappans had occupied mostly 2 river basins, of course, the Indus river basin and the Saraswati, which is today known as Ghaggar Hakra. The part of the river which flow in India called Ghaggar, and the moment it enters into Pakistan, it's called Hakra. So these are the 2 basins which were occupied. But among these 2 basins, the Saraswati basin was the most important, because we find nearly 2/3 of the Harappan settlements discovered so far located in the Saraswati basin. So that means this was the most important region for the Harappans. And we have some of the great sites located in this part, like Rakhigarhi, Kalibanga, etc. As far as the river Saraswati is concerned, I think that issue, the location of the river Saraswati, the existence of river Saraswati is properly documented now, and we have a lot of geological information, a lot of hydrological, archaeological data available now. So on the basis of that, even satellite imagery done by ISRO scientists. So all this data clearly show the course of river Saraswati, and also it very well matches with the description given in the text, Rigvedic text. Rigvedic text clearly talks about the origin of the river, where it originates, and what are the landscape through which it was flowing through. So it really matches very well with that. So as far as the existence of river Saraswati is concerned, also the dry course of the river Saraswati is concerned, now that is properly documented. Now here you can see in this particular photograph, this is the satellite photography imagery done by ISRO scientists. So they have, here you can see the proper, the dried course of river Saraswati originates somewhere in the foothills of the Himalayas. And also along with this main river, you also can see one of the major tributaries called Drushyadvati in the Rigvedic text. So that river also has been properly shown here. And the site of Rakhigarhi is located between Indus and this Drushyadvati river. Today, of course, the Drushyadvati river is called Chautang River. So this is the region, which is very, very important for the Harappas, most fertile units, not only in South Asia, but the whole, in the world. And from this map, you can clearly make out, the high concentration of the Harappan sites in the Saraswati Basin. Comparatively, there are few sites in the Indus Basin because Indus River is very, very ferocious river, and the settlements located along the banks of river Indus, they are frequently threatened by flood. So that river has a history of flood, whereas the Saraswati Basin was very, very safe. The rivers flow through deep gorges, and rarely the flood water, comes out of the river course. So there is no danger. And second, this Saraswati River is equally fertile, as fertile, or maybe more fertile than the Indus River Basin. Because of that, more sites are found here. So, as far as the beginning is concerned, now this is the site which is located in Pakistan. It's called Mehergarh. This site was excavated by, French and the Italian, scholars in 70s and 80s. And here they have found the traces of the beginning of settled life going back to 7,000, even 7,500 BCE. And from 7,500 BC or 7,000 BC, there's a continuous, transformation, development happening. And the same development has transformed into formation of Harappan culture at one stage, and from Harappan culture to Harappan civilization. So complete history of that is, is found here. And we have strong archaeological evidence in this particular respect. So at this side, now we have the evidence of the domestication of plant and animal. Some of the animals like cattle, sheep, and goat, dogs. These were the animals which were domesticated. And also we have wheat and barley, which these are the crops which are domesticated by the people. So we have proper evidence. And then, of course, there is a continuity development from this beginning. Then, the burial custom that was introduced maybe around 7,000 BC, the same kind of custom continues throughout, through the Harappan period up to the maybe end of 1000 BC. So there's a continuity in that. And probably, life right from the early stage, right from 7,000 BC, people believed in life after death, because these burials contain a lot of, other goods also. Like we find when the pottery was introduced, we find pottery kept inside the burial pit. We do find the traces of Harappan jewelry in them, and also some of the tools used by the people. So probably they believed in, second life, and therefore, these goods were buried along with the dead body. So that is found here. Then also these people, the early farmers, maybe around 7,000 BC, they developed some of the, basic crafts, and we have strong evidence of that also. And some of the jewelry was developed by these people. Some of, maybe the very, utility tools were developed by these people. And then they started using, along with the stone, they also started using metal, that is copper. And the Harappans, of course, they developed also bronze at some stage. So this is all the development happened indigenously, because that is reflected in the archaeological data. We have clear evidence about the introduction of all these different technologies, basic technologies by these people. So that is the evidence we have. Also, right from the beginning, as I mentioned, that these people had contact with different regions. Now, why we say that? Because we have evidence for that. For example, these are some of the articles made from shell, and that particular shell is called Turbinella pyrum. And the detailed analysis of this shell clearly indicated that these type of shells are found only along the Karachi coast. So Karachi and Mehergarh, distance is almost 1,000 kilometers. So they had such a long distance trade that time. Also, there are some, jewelry made of the mother of pearl. So this mother of, this raw material has come from Oman, clearly indicating that, they also had contact with, far off places. And that contact is very well reflected in the archaeological data that I'm showing here, and also in the genetic data also. And then finally, I come to the site of Rakhigarhi, perhaps the biggest Harappan site, but perhaps the biggest archaeological site in Indian subcontinent, spread over an area of roughly 550 hectares. And here, of course, we had, as I mentioned earlier, we had a number of research problems here. One is that, as I mentioned, that we wanted to find out the area of the site. So we did these latest geophysical instruments were used for calculating the total area of the site, and we have recreated the maybe the old landscape. We have calculated the total area, and we are seeing, you can see here the area or the part of the site shown in reddish color. That is the part which is visible, which is quite well preserved today. Whereas the portion shown in gray color, that was the part of the settlement, which is destroyed by the people. But they had occupied almost the entire area, which is shown here. The area which is under gray portion, that was also part of the Harappan settlement, but that is destroyed. So we have been able to recreate that, and we have used all the latest geophysical instruments there. Here you can see that major portion of the site is under the modern occupation. Nearly 10,000 people are living on the perhaps the most important part of the site here. But at the same time, there is enough area which is available. This is the part which is very well protected, very well preserved, and the Archaeological Survey of India has protected this site as a national monument. So you can see here, whatever is visual today, even if we are able to protect that, we will certainly succeed in protecting one of the biggest Harappan sites in Indian subcontinent, and the efforts are on in this particular respect. So we did this in order to understand the history of the site. Of course, we took this particular trench, and in this trench, we have found really proper development from the beginning, which is around 5,500 BC here. From 5,500 BC to 2000 BC, there's a constant development, and that development was very well evident in the structural activities and also in other material culture. So as far as the structural activity is concerned, there's another site called Virana. There also, we have been able to identify this particular cultural development. So at this particular site, in the lowermost levels, we have some circular features. So those circular features have been identified as the circular pit dwellings, the cluster of pit dwellings. So one cluster consists of maybe 3 or 4 pits, and the function of each pit was different. 1 or 2 pits were used for living purpose, one as a kitchen, one as a store. So that kind of evidence is found. And then of course, these are the underground pits. We call them as pit dwellings. In the next stage, of course, then there is a change, which I'm going to show you. But here, the entire history of the architectural activities was quite clear at Virana. Same is the case with Farmana and Rakhigarhi also. So now we have clear-cut idea about the transformation, and that transformation is very evident in the material culture also found here. So these are some of the pit dwellings you find. They look small, but as I mentioned, that they were in clusters. So these type of structures are found in the lowermost levels, and some of the big ones were used for living purpose. The small ones, in which we find maybe fireplace or the cooking place or the place for storage, the activities have been properly identified. So this is the kind of the evidence in the lowermost levels. In the second stage, again, they continue with the circular structures, but now they have started building on the ground. So you can see one of the maybe floors of the circular structure excavated here. That is quite clear. In the third stage, then they started building proper rectangular structures. So here you can see a rectangular structure, and now most of the elements of the Harappan culture are now visible. For example, this wall is made of mud bricks, and these bricks are in proper Harappan ratio, 1:2:3, and 1:2:4. At the same time, they also started manufacturing burnt bricks, which were used for making their bathing platforms and also toilets in the house. So those elements also were added to the structure. So now from the third phase onward, they started building rectangular structures. But the rectangular structures in the first stage, the third stage, they are small. But in the fourth phase, one can see a modicum of planning, proper modicum of planning. Now, you can see the concept of, a main street, structures located on both sides, even small street, lane by lanes. So this concept began to appear in the fourth stage. So this is the development stage. And in the last stage, this is not from Rakigadi, of course, this is from Mohenjo-daro, just to show that their full-fledged town planning was achieved in the last stage, where we are on 2600 BC. So this is how the gradual growth, the Harappan town planning has not come into existence suddenly. There's a long precedence, and that evidence in that respect is found in the Saraswati Basin. So this is a important contribution that we made. Similarly, this development is visible in the ceramic also. In the ceramic typology as well as in the ceramic technology. This is the pottery found in the earliest level. From the lowermost level, the pottery that is found is crude and handmade, not well finished, not well properly baked. But some of the Harappan shapes began to appear in the early stage. In the second stage, the pottery is made on slow turntable. The pottery from the first phase was made entirely by hand only. In the second stage, they made pottery on slow turntable. Now you can see the color of the pottery has started changing. Slowly it is become now Harappan pottery color. And in the last stage, in the third stage, the pottery is now classical pottery. They have achieved this. This pottery is made on fast wheel. That is the technique which was developed by the Harappans. And you can see it is beautifully painted. The paintings have survived for more than 5,000 years, and they use almost the natural colors. The painting was done before the pottery was fired, and therefore the colors or the motifs have remained permanent on the pottery. And these are some of the distinct shapes that the Harappans developed. For example, this is the big SF jar. These are some of the goblets, dish on stand, perforated jar. So these are the typical. So there is also a history of development in ceramic technology here, and that is quite visible at the site. Then I mentioned about the burial excavation at the site of Farmana. Now you can see this was the burial cemetery at Farmana, and here we excavated a large number of Harappan skeletal remains. But you can see we have not really taken any precaution while excavating the burials. Now we have realized that if you don't take precaution, our DNA, the modern DNA or the DNA of the excavators can get into ancient DNA easily. So we have to prevent that. And therefore, at Rakigadi, we change our approach. So this is the cemetery at Rakigadi, roughly 1 kilometer away from the settlement. Always the Harappan cemetery was separate, roughly 1 kilometer away from the settlement. And here the Archaeological Survey of India had carried out some excavation, whereas we excavated much larger area of the cemetery when we started the work. And as I mentioned, one of the objective was to extract DNA so that we can talk about the people. So we had three issues, in fact. Who are the Harappan people? What is the genetic of the genetic history of the Harappans? What is the interaction between Harappans and the contemporary population? We wanted to understand that also. And whether there is any continuity from Harappans till modern times. So these were the three issues. And the three issues can be dealt only when we have DNA data. And finally, we have that data from the site. So this is the part of the excavation, beginning of the excavation at cemetery. But as I mentioned that we started taking precaution because we always wanted to prevent any kind of contamination in the ancient samples. And this type of precaution here, it looks like a corona warrior, but actually this is a burial warrior. So we use all the disposable gowns, masks, goggles, head cap, disposable gloves, etc. Also the instruments, the same instruments were not used, digging instruments were not used for digging another burial. So we use different instrument, digging instruments for different burials, making, taking utmost care, in fact, that we try to prevent as much, possible as the, contamination of the site. So we have done that, we succeeded that. But at the same time, in spite of these, there was some, maybe, there was some contamination happening, because when we started analyzing the data, at one stage, we also found the traces of the East Asian people. No way, because these people had no contact with East Asian people at all. And then we realized that one of our excavators was from Korea. One of the Korean students was also part of the excavation team. So in spite of all the precaution, there was some leakage. So imagine, if we had not taken precaution, the entire, modern data or DNA could have got into ancient DNA. So that type of precaution was taken by us. And, this is how, all of us, when we excavate, we ourselves do the work. We excavate, the burials, very, very, carefully and delicately. So this is how the excavation is carried out. And then, of course, all of us use the same precaution. We excavated a number of burials. And as I mentioned, that, we excavated one burial at a time. Immediately after the excavation, we documented the burial and we packed the samples and sent to our laboratory in Deccan College. So that is how we followed. And that approach was quite, was very good, in fact, because we finally succeeded in getting DNA. These are some of the skeletal remains that were excavated. We do find, inside the burials, we found pots, maybe their ornaments and other maybe tools, etc. And the quality and the quantity varies from burial to burial. So on the basis of these, we can also make some inference about the social status, economic status of the people or the families. So here is a man, buried in a pit where there are only 3 pots, but there are some burials, where there are some also double burials. This is one of the double burials. But here you can see that, in some burials we have number of pots. Maybe the status of the person was much higher than compared to the previous one. So this is the kind of data that we generated. We also made, very elaborate sampling also, because the Korean scientists, they also were successful in recovering the parasite eggs from ancient burials in Korea. And from the parasite eggs, they did identify the DNA of, individual people. But so we also wanted to find out whether there is a survival of parasite eggs in the Harappan burials. And therefore, we have done this, very extensive sampling also while excavating the burials. But unfortunately, we did not find any survival of the parasite eggs. In our body, of course, in all of us, we have parasite eggs in our body. And after the death, the flesh and the skin, they disappear, they decompose. But the parasite eggs can always survive, maybe for thousands of years. And if we are successful in getting parasite eggs, we can get DNA of the person also. So that, paleoparasitology also is a new science developed now. So that is also quite useful. When, the samples, this how the samples were packed at the site, we have used this, very, we have taken proper precaution. After the samples were brought to the laboratory in Deccan College, we took the same precaution to prevent any kind of contamination. The samples are clean, and then they are transported to CCMB in Hyderabad, where, the extraction of DNA started. So the approach that, we had, we did, very, very elaborate, examination of the skeletal remains. We did a thorough anthropological examination. Here we identified maybe the age, sex of the person, the general, height of the person, and the overall build of the person. And then we also did the CT scanning, and the data that was generated from CT scanning, that was used for craniofacial reconstruction, for the 3D reconstruction of the Harappan face, that, we succeeded that. Then also we did the paleoparasitology, where we, of course, did not succeed. And then we did sampling for ancient DNA analysis, and also for undertaking a number of other scientific analyses like stable isotope analysis, starch grain analysis, residue analysis, lipid profile analysis, strontium analysis. So from these analyses, different kinds of analysis, we can certainly know about the type of food that was eaten by the people, what is the percent of plant food and animal food in their diet, and overall, whether it was they ate the local food or the food was imported from somewhere else. So we can talk about that. We can talk about the health of the people also, whether they suffer from a disease. We did a lot of paleopathological studies also. So everything, every possible information can be extracted from the ancient human bodies. So this particular data is very, very important. And this was the approach that we adopted. So let me tell you that the condition in India is not really conducive for preservation of DNA, traces or DNA signatures, because the climate is very, very, the landscape is always wet here. The climate is, humid, which is not really good, and the soil is more acidic, which is not good at all for the survival or the preservation of the organic matter. So very rarely, of course, we find the survival of the DNA of such an old age. But what we did, we excavated nearly 60 burials. All the burials were examined, and we failed in getting any DNA traces in all the burials. And then, of course, at one stage, we thought that perhaps we will not succeed in getting any kind of DNA trace, because we thought that DNA cannot survive such a long, years. But then, this was the lady. This is the skeletal remain of a lady, maybe age between 35 to 40 years, and probably this lady is from her status was good in the society, because you can see the number of pots kept along with the dead body, and she had very sharp features. She was quite beautiful when she was alive, almost quarter to 6 feet in height. So this is the lady which came to our rescue, and it is always said that the lady luck. So we have experienced that lady luck here, and this lady has given us the strongest and the authentic DNA of the Harappan people for the first time. So this research was carried out for the first time in South Asia, and we have succeeded in extracting DNA in spite of all the adverse conditions, the adverse maybe climatic conditions, adverse maybe soil conditions here. But in spite of that, so more and more research, in fact, in this respect, will always help us. And let me tell you that even though we have samples from one skeletal remain, that is enough because to talk about the genetic history of South Asian people, because it is like testing rice. When it is whether the rice is cooked or not, you pick up one grain and taste. So DNA is like that. You don't have to taste hundreds of samples to understand the genetic history. So from this we found a proper evidence of genetic history of the South Asian people. So this results, in fact, ultimately after we got the results from these 3 different sources, cross-checking from Harvard and from Korea, then we decided to publish, and all those who were involved in the research, they were part of the publication team. So we had roughly at Harvard, there were 6 scientists from 60 different countries working on the same samples. So all of them have participated in the publication. So this was published in a very, very prestigious Shell journal, which has got almost 40 impact factor. And the title itself indicates an ancient Harappan genome lacks ancestry from steppe pastoralists or Iranian farmers. So now it is quite clear that neither the steppe pastoralists, so-called the Aryan region, nor the Iranian farmers have contributed to the development of South Asian ancestry of the people from the settled life onward. So this is a most important research that we did, and let me tell that even though there are some maybe people who are not specialists in the field, they are making some noise about this research. But most of the professionals, both in fact archaeologists and genetic historians in India and abroad, they have accepted this particular research. And there's one very big international conference on genomics, And it's a session in Korea, sorry, in China, in maybe towards the end of 19, they had identified 9 breakthrough researches in the world, and Rakigadi was on top of that. So this particular research has been acknowledged, accepted by all the scientific communities all over the world, not only in India only. So this is the recognition that they have given to us. Then what happens now? Let me explain that. What happens when we are on 10,000 BC? The data, we have some data from the earlier phase also. So around 10,000 BC, or that is 12,000 years ago, the hunter-gatherers, maybe somewhere in Northwest, they split into 2 groups. One group came to South Asia. This is the group which came to South Asia, and one group went to Iran. The group which went to Iran, they got mixed up with the Anatolian farmers there. So a lot of mixing was happening. But the group which came here, because both the group went to Iran and the group came to South Asia, both had a common ancestry. So naturally, this common ancestry will be reflected both in Iran and South Asia. But once they came to South Asia, a distinct genetic history was being developed there. And then we can say that that this is the distinct South Asian history, genetic history that was developed here in South Asia. And then what we found that that the same genetic elements or genetic signatures continued into Harappan population. And then of course from Harappan till modern population also the same genetic signatures continued. So there is an indication that that the genetic history that was developed maybe 10,000 BCE or 12,000 years ago, that genetic history has continued till today. There's no breakage of the genetic history at any stage. There's a lot of mixing happening. When when a gene of a particular community exceeds 25%, that means we are descendants. We are descendants from that particular community or particular gene pool. And in most of the population in South Asia, right from Afghanistan to Bengal and from Kashmir to Andaman Nicobar, most of us, no matter what religion we follow, what caste we follow, what creed we follow, most of us have a dominant Harappan gene. That means we are all descendants of the Harappan people, and that is the important research that we have done. What is the significance of that? That means earlier it was thought that most of the developments in South Asia, particularly the settled life, the beginning of maybe village life, then the urbanization, that was done by the people coming from outside. So that was the earlier view. Now this research has clearly indicated the archaeological data also there is a continuity from the beginning of settled life till modern times, and also in genetic history also there is a continuity from maybe from Harappans till modern times, and from 10,000 BC to the Harappan times also. So most of the developments were done by the local people. That means even though people came from outside, they have not really broken our genetic history nor our cultural history at any stage. The mixing was happening, and that mixing is very well clear in the archaeological data as well as genetic data also. So this is the most important part of our research. And we have different hypotheses regarding who are the Harappan people. After 2000 BC, of course, there is more maybe more interaction between maybe steppe region, Iranian region, the Gulf region, and the Indian subcontinent. So that increases. This interaction increases after 2000 BC, and I will also tell you why that interaction increases after 2000 BC. So we also have done, the sampling of the modern people. We selected nearly 2,000 people from different groups. Nearly, 140 different groups were represented in our research, and all, we have selected samples from different parts of South Asia, from Afghanistan. CCMA has, a very, great pool of the samples from different parts of South Asia and even beyond that. So we compared, this DNA of the Harappans with the modern population, and population from all over South Asia. They have mostly the Harappan genes. These are all the different linguistic groups were identified, were selected for the DNA research. So we have Indo-European, speaking people here, the Munda or the, Astro-Asiatic people speaking, here, the Dravidian people or Dravidian language speaking people. So we collected samples from all, and that revealed that now all of us, whether we are, we people from South India or from North India, from maybe East India or from West India, all of us have the common ancestry. So this is the result of our excavation. So what we did also, why after 2000 BCE, there's more inflow of the people from maybe Iran and Central Asia. Earlier, it was thought that people have started coming to Indian subcontinent, maybe so-called Aryans from maybe this region from South, Central Asia, and through Iran to Indian subcontinent. But the research that is done here has given us completely contradictory results. We have samples from the site of Shari Sokta in Iran, and also from samples from Gonur, which is located in Turkmenistan in Central Asia. And here, both the sites were excavated by the local archaeologists. They did find a lot of Harappan material there, indicating that the Harappans and the people living at both the sites, they were contemporary, and also they had interaction, maybe trade contacts, because of which the Harappan material is found there. And also we have some skeletal remains here. The DNA of the skeletal remains was available. So we compared that DNA, the genetic pool of these people with the Harappans at Rakhigarhi. And what we found, surprisingly, we found Harappan elements, Harappan genes present in the population here in Central Asia and also in Iran. But we did not find their gene present in the Harappan population. So this is very interesting. That means the Harappans, maybe from Rakhigarhi or other regions, they first began to go out and establish contact with this region. And then after that, this happened maybe around 2500 BC. And after that, only people from that region, started developing that reciprocal movement. They started coming to Indian subcontinent. And because of that, after 2000 BC, we do find this is reflected in the archaeological as well as genetic data also. So if at all, anybody believes, we don't believe, of course, our Aryan is not a race, it's not a tribe or any community. Probably it was used as a respectable term. But if at all anybody believes that Aryans were there, then perhaps the Indians were Aryans, and they first began to go out, and then of course the reciprocal movement happened. So this is also very, very important results that we have obtained from this. This is a very, very strong indication that we are getting. And then how the movement has started. This is the region northwest, Afghanistan, Marigar, around there. The development started. Development of the early farming communities. The second region, where we find the next important evidence is the Mid-Ganga Basin, where the development started slightly late, maybe around 6500 BC. And probably the Harappan influence, or the people also started moving between northwest and the Mid-Ganga Basin. And here the mixing started happening in Mewar region of Rajasthan around 4500 BC. That mixing started happening, and in rest of India, maybe around between 3000 and 2500 BC. In rest of India, in Deccan, South India, and up to Bengal in eastern part. So this is how the movement started in Indian subcontinent, and that is very well supported by archaeological data. Also, we have some contemporary cultures in Rajasthan, in Madhya Pradesh, in Maharashtra, in South India also. And archaeologically, it was quite clear that the Harappans and these contemporary people, they had very strong trade links. And the movement was happening between Harappan and the contemporary regions. And naturally, because of the movement, the mixing was happening. And then the Harappan genes started flowing in this part. And from Deccan to South India, eastern part, this is how the movement must have happened, in fact, in South Asia. So these are some of the contemporary cultures. This is the Harappan region. We have the region, contemporary, what we call as Neolithic or Chalcolithic farmers. So they were contemporary with the Harappan period, mostly the mature Harappan phase or the Harappan civilization phase. So on both on the eastern periphery of the Harappan region as well as on the western periphery, number of these cultures flourish, and these were the people who were contemporary to the Harappans. You can see we have four linguistic groups. Of course, one is Indo-Europeans, then Austro-Asiatic, Dravidian, and Tibeto-Burman. We don't find link with the Tibeto-Burman region, but we have links from Andaman to this Kashmir, and from this region to South India. We have this region has a common ancient ancestry. So this is the we find, and then one can wonder how people look different then, why there is a difference in the complexion. That is also very important. This complexion has nothing to do with the genetic history at all. Even though we have same genes, there is a possibility that the complexion can vary, and the complexion depends more on maybe the geography of the region in which people are living, the food habit of the people, the climate of that region, and also the mixing that was happening in North India. Of course, there is more mixing with the Iranian and the steppe region, or the with the Gulf region, because of which we have some slightly different complexion in that part. Whereas from south of Narmada, we have more mixing from African region, because of which we have slightly different complexion in South India. But India is considered to be an ethnic museum, because perhaps the highest this variation is found in the appearance, in the complexion of the people in South Asia. So, but all these people have common ancestry. That is the result we are getting. And then, of course, I will move to the last component of my presentation, that is the facial reconstruction. Now, in the facial reconstruction of the world, also one can see continuity from Harappan till modern times. So for the facial reconstruction, of course, we need complete intact data. And fortunately, we found some intact data. This is the skeleton of a young Harappan boy, maybe 18 to 19 years old. And we have done the reconstruction of this facial feature of this particular boy. And then, of course, we also done the reconstruction of one Harappan woman between 35 to 40 years old. And her skeleton remains also is quite intact. So what we did in fact, now for the reconstruction, we need two sets of data. One is the matrix data, the measurements of the bone. So we did, of course, that while excavating the burials. So we had that particular matrix data available with us. And the other data that is required is the data of the inner anatomy of the people, of the individual. So that is possible through this maybe CT scanning. So we did CT scanning of the skeletal remains, and both the data were fed in fact in the computer, and the computer started maybe reconstructing the broken portion of the skull. So in 3 stages, finally this reconstruction was completed. Then slowly it started putting flesh and blood on the screen, on the skeletal remains, and then finally skin. And then of course you can see for the first time, you can see this is the research which is done for the first time. So we are showing for the first time how the Harappan people look like. This is the initial stage of reconstruction. There are more, of course, very complex reconstruction also that will happen maybe in the second stage. One can also know what was the color of the eyes, color of the hair, color of the skin. That will happen in fact in the second stage. But from the appearance, you can see this is the appearance of a Harappan boy, and then this modern Haryana boy. You can see the similarity in fact in the appearance. Similarly, the Harappan woman and the modern woman, there's so much similarity. So there is a continuity in fact in this respect also. So now I presented to you in fact 3 different sets of data, and all this data that we have, all the evidences that we have, clearly indicate that neither early Iranian farmers nor steppes have contributed to the making of the South Asian ancestry. There is no change or breakage in the ancestry of major South Asian population for last 12,000 years, implying neither large-scale migration nor invasion of the so-called Aryans from outside South Asia. Number of invasions have happened, but all the people coming from outside, they were always absorbed in the Indian society, and Indians were able to protect their ancestry as well as their cultural elements for last 12,000 years, no matter, how much mixing has happened, but this is the characteristic feature of the Indian population. Then, of course, as I mentioned, different human complexion develop in South Asia due to factors like geography, climate, food habits, etc. Most of the developments like, domestication, settled way of life, village life, city life. Then also we have, the developments of basic science and technologies all happen, in fact, or done by the indigenous people. So we have new light on the Aryan invasion. Now we can certainly, challenge this Aryan invasion. We can debunk this Aryan invasion. We also, maybe at some stage, I can talk about the Harappans and the Vedic culture. And I am of the view that Harappans were the Vedic people. And I have got some strong evidence in this respect. Maybe I can give a separate talk on that. Then also my hunch is that perhaps Harappans spoke Indo-European language, because Sanskrit is the base of the Indo-European language. So probably, this early form of Sanskrit was evolved by the Harappans. This is just a guesswork. I'm working on this, of course. And then, of course, implying gene flow from South Asia into Sharisukta and Gonur. Probably, we can have a strong case to suggest out of India movement theory. So this is, and then, of course, future plan, as I mentioned, that, I think we would like to go back to Rakhigarhi and other sites, generate some more data in this respect, so that, whatever indications we are getting, whatever preliminary results, we have obtained, they have to be supported by additional data. We have not really understood the composition of the population at Rakhigarhi itself, because Rakhigarhi was such a big site. So there may be a number of different groups about which we do not have clear-cut idea. We have no idea about the composition of the population at Rakhigarhi. Then, of course, the Harappans spread into different ecological zones. We had to analyze data from Gujarat, from Rajasthan, from even Harappa and Mohenjo-daro also. Fortunately, that data is available with the Anthropological Survey of India. So we are collaborating with them, and we have started working on this particular part also. So this is one plan that we have. And then we want to go beyond, the Harappan region also. There are contemporary populations. We have skeletal remains from the Chalcolithic people from Central India, from Deccan and South India, the Neolithic farmers from South India. And so we want to analyze that data also, so that we can understand what is the relation between Harappans and the contemporary population. And then, of course, we also have some data from the succeeding early Iron Age period, that's called megalithic period. We want to analyze that also. And then, of course, we want to generate some more data on the modern population, so that our research becomes foolproof, and we are able to convince. In fact, we are able to produce this convincing data. So this is the kind of research that we have done, and this has got tremendous implication on Indian history. So thank you very much. I again thank the organizers for inviting me and giving me this honor. And I thank my friend Sanjeev ji for coming here, and we look forward to listen to you also, Sanjeev ji. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much for a scintillating presentation, Professor Shinde. And let me say that many of these new data that is coming together, it's slowly beginning to fit together into a new tapestry, which fits a lot of things. It doesn't just fit the archaeology and the genetics, but it also fits our own understanding of our traditional understanding of our history. So if you go back and look at, for example, the Vedic texts and so on, there is no mention of any migration into India of any point in time. The people are clearly talking about a landscape that exists even today, or at least is discernible with a little bit of digging around. Whether it's the existence of the Saraswati River, which is clearly described as being between the Yamuna and the Sutlej. And indeed, there is a dry riverbed in exactly that same place, just where you would expect it. Similarly, all the descriptions of climate, including, the monsoon cycle and the various seasons and so on, are clearly relating to an Indian landscape. It is not relating to any other landscape. So clearly, it makes no sense to have this, get caught up into this colonial thinking that somehow Indian civilization is some sort of a gift by white people from Central Asia. It may, however, interest you to know that we are not the only people who have been subjected to this kind of colonial history making. Take, for example, African history. There is evidence, for example, in Africa of pre-colonial cities, like, for example, Great Zimbabwe, of course, much later period than Harappans, but nevertheless, a medieval city called Greater Zimbabwe. And yet, when the Europeans discovered the remains of Greater Zimbabwe, their first understanding of this was that this must have been set up by people who came from the Mediterranean or somewhere in the Europe to set up these cities in Africa in ancient times. And so you had, just like we have the Aryan invasion theory, you have the Hamitic invasion theory, just to explain away ancient sites that may be in places which non-Europeans had set up. And as recently into the 80s, it was simply impossible in Southern Europe, given that it was under apartheid and so on, or in Rhodesia, that people would simply dismiss the idea that locals could create high culture. It's only in the last 20 years that Africans have begun to re-establish their own history and to point out that, look, the local Shona people clearly set up these cities in Zimbabwe. So, this rediscovery and decolonization of our history is happening systematically worldwide. It is also happening in India. And of course, it is being done now with scholars of the stature of Professor Shinde, who are bringing this history together. Now, there's a lot of history coming together. Of course, we talked about it from a particular perspective. He didn't have time to elaborate on some of the other topics he talked about. But it should be also clear that there's a lot of talk about the Harappans, but in fact, the Harappans are not in isolation, as he himself showed in that map. The rest of India also had other cultures, some of which may have been quite developed urban cultures. They were not brick-based cultures, so they were all wood-based cultures. But we have now lots of evidence of these cultures which may have large settlements and fairly evolved technology, including the finding in Sanyal of chariots and so on. But even in and around Prayagraj, there have been very ancient sites which are among the oldest sites in the subcontinent. So what we are dealing with is not merely Harappans in the northwest of the country, but a network of cultures, some of which had very developed cultures, who were trading with each other, who were exchanging people through migration, as Professor Shinde pointed out. And so through these cultures and these migrations and exchange over time, what we now know as Indian civilization came together. This is not to suggest that there were no inputs from the rest of the world. Far from it. We traded with the rest of the world. There were migrations in and out of India. After all, we are dealing with very vast periods of time where climate changed, political conditions changed, and so on. But the core idea of Indian civilization does have a very old root within the subcontinent. And I think that comes together very, very clearly. And I want to emphasize here again that you have to also remember that the landscape we are dealing with changed over time. So, for example, Balochistan, which is now impassable desert, was in fact a grassland for much of the Neolithic and early Chalcolithic period. And people were simply going back and forth. There was maritime trade happening between the ports in Gujarat and the Middle East. And there was also trade happening overland through to Central Asia. And so there was lots of things moving around. Incidentally, while we are talking about human genetics, there is also a lot of animal genetics that is now coming up, which is very interesting. For example, we know that around about 2000 to 1500 BC, there is suddenly a large amount of genetic inputs from zebu, i.e. humped cattle from the Indian subcontinent, pops up in the Middle East. Now, clearly this is a migration outward from India, because we know for sure that, humped cattle is from India. It pops up in the genetics of the Middle Eastern cattle by around about exactly the period when the mature Harappan periods were in decline. And a little bit later, you have, of course, the treaty between the Mitanni and Hittites, which also pops up. Now, the presumption then is that, you know, these migrations were outward from India. The Indian animals are turning up in the Middle East. People speaking a Indian-related language and worshipping Vedic gods turn up in the Middle East. They also have, incidentally, a technology, iron, which is attested to have been systematically used for the first time in India. First in the Godavari area and in the central Gangetic plains, not in Northwest. So if it was a technology that came in from Central Asia, as some people have pointed out, then it certainly would have turned up in the Northwest first and then made its way into the rest of India. Far from it. Iron technology first attested in Central and North India, or Central and the Gangetic plains, and then it shows up in Northwest India, and then even later, it pops up in the Middle East, associated with the Mitanni, who are a Vedic people because they are worshipping Vedic gods, they're speaking a Vedic language. So, I mean, the evidence is quite clear that at least some outward migration happened. I'm not saying it was one way, it may have been both ways, but certainly some Vedic related people migrated out around about the beginning of the second millennium BC and headed out towards the Middle East. So this is certainly a lot of evidence of that as well. So there's, as you can see, you know, things are coming together. Another word which is very common thing is that, oh, by the way, what about chariots? Wouldn't that have given these so-called Aryans a lot of technological advantage? Well, let me point out that, first of all, the oldest extant chariot in the world has been found in India, and it's not in the Northwest again. It's in near Bagpat, which is in the Gangetic plains. So it's still northern India, but not, Punjab and so on. And in any case, just look at a map and you will know, even if somebody had invented a chariot in Kazakhstan, they would have certainly abandoned it along the way as they made their way through Afghanistan and Punjab, which is completely unsuitable for chariots. I mean, it's only when you get to Haryana and the Gangetic plains that chariots become a useful thing. Just imagine trying to use chariots in the Hindu Kush when there are no existing roads and other things. It would not have been fun at all, and certainly not a military advantage. So the point I'm making is that even as we gather all this information, we need to keep an open mind. This is not the end of the investigation. There's a lot of new archaeology happening, lots of new information will come, and we'll get the better nuances. But I think there is now, as Professor Shinde has pointed out, enough evidence to suggest that the old colonial story can be debunked. Now, we still don't have a new story that is fully built out, but we can see the contours of it as we going forward. Now, what I'm going to now do is to open it up for Q&A. It would be great fun to have a conversation. May I request some of you to type in your questions into the chat box? But I can see that Usha seems to have a question in her mind. Is that the case?
Yes.
So why don't I ask you to start the process while I give others some chance to write in their questions into their chat box, and I can either read it out or I can ask them to ask the questions themselves. Over to you, Usha.
Thank you, Mr. Sanyal. Professor Shinde, I just want you to tell us, you also excavated Gulestan and Farmana. Were these contemporaneous culture, and what were your findings in these places?
Yeah, Parmana is a typical Harappan site. Of course, it is as typical as the site of Rakhigarhi. So Farmana and Rakhigarhi, they are of the same culture. Also, I excavated Gulestan and Balathal, which was contemporary to the Harappans, but it was a regional culture. So they maintain, of course, their identity. But there was a very strong, trade links between Harappans and the Chalcolithic people in Rajasthan, and that link is very well reflected in the archaeological data. Unfortunately, we do not have skeletal data from the, from the Banas or the, this Ahar area. So we, at this stage, we are not able to, maybe find out, the genetic relation between Harappans and the contemporary population. But they were certainly, trading with each other, and they were contemporary in that region. Not only in that part, even, sites like, Daimabad, even Inamgao, it was contemporary to the late Harappan phase. So these are the sites which coexisted with the Harappan, maybe mature Harappan phase or the late Harappan phase. So we have number of those cultures, of course.
Okay, so there is a question here from Alak Rai. Thank you, Professor Vasant Shinde. Two questions. Where did the Harappans could have been from before 1200 BC? There is a lot of time difference between out of Africa migration and about 12,000 BC. So this is to the end of the Ice Age, I suppose. Does tooth enamel analysis give you an interesting information about the region and the period of interest? Apparently, some information is buried in this data about what kind of water they were drinking from year to year over the lifetime of an individual.
No, as far as, as I mentioned in the initial stage, in the beginning of the lecture, that we have no data from the Stone Age period, from the period, which is considered with the hunting-gathering stage. So we have no clear-cut idea, but most of the hypothesis that the Africans, the Stone Age people from Africa, they began to move into Indian subcontinent. They landed on the Indian coast, and they occupied mostly the coast. Then they started, making inroads inside. But we do not have any, genetic data from that population. So we cannot really say much about, who are the people prior to maybe the beginning of the settled life. But the Harappans are clearly, the Harappans are not distinct in the sense that there's a continuity from 7000 BC to the Harappan period. That means the same people have continued from the beginning of settled life till the modern times. We also have done some maybe stable analysis, and we have analyzed data. So we do find that the people at Rakhigarhi, even at Farmana, they have eaten the local food definitely. But there are some people, in fact, maybe one or two women we found at Farmana who probably came from the Ganeshwar Jodhpura region, because in their teeth enamel we found the food that they had eaten, which was not a local food, probably the food which was eaten maybe Ganeshwar Jodhpura region. So some picture is emerging from that point of view also. But here, since I was only talking about the genetic history and the research that we have done, and because of the paucity of time, I have not really mentioned about that. But we are doing this in entire inclusive research in this respect, and we are trying to tap all the available sources possible, so that we can generate some kind of holistic history of the people in this region.
Okay, so now we have another question from Jaya Menon. How do you explain the origins of the Dravidian languages if India is unbroken cultural descendant of Harappans and Harappa is Indo-Aryan religion? Not religion, but Indo-Aryan language.
No, as far as the languages are concerned, the origin of various languages is concerned, I think it is very difficult to say at this particular stage. My hypothesis that there is a maybe emergence of number of local cultures. They coexisted with the earlier Harappan phase, with the mature Harappan phase also. They had very strong interaction. And as maybe the regional cultures have evolved, maybe the regional languages also started evolving along with that. But we do not have clear evidence or data on that particular aspect. Only at this stage, I can only hypothesis that in the north part or the north, maybe northwest part, people perhaps were speaking mostly the Indo-European language. And my hunch is that perhaps these languages originated, the Indo-European language particularly, probably originated in that part. And later when the people started moving out, perhaps the language and cultural elements also started moving along with them outside India. So that is the hypothesis. But there is no evidence to support that. We are working on this particular aspect.
So let me add to this. I think one of the important things that we need to think about, first of all, India, as we mentioned, had several contemporary cultures which were reasonably developed in different parts of the country, and I think Dravidian languages coexisted with all these languages, and they were probably moving around. And it's quite possible that some parts of the Harappan zone had another language, it may not be Dravidian even, something which doesn't exist. So you have to understand that these are not, none of these are pure cultures. People, they are intermarrying, they are moving around, all kinds of things are going on. So I think we to have these, much of this debate unfortunately has a mental image of some pure cultures in different parts of the country with pure languages and pure origins. They are not. They're all groups of people doing all kinds of things, intermarrying, mixing, moving around. And some of these have just survived and evolved. So you have to, I think, much of this obsession with these, pure Aryan or pure Dravidian culture is completely misplaced. So the question itself needs to be rethought and reimagined. Would you agree, Professor Saab?
Yes, very much, yes.
So let me move on to another question, which is there from Meenal. The script is still to be deciphered, I'm told, and unless that happens, we will not be clear enough of ideas about the Harappans. I request you to kindly elaborate on this.
Yeah, script, we have not been able to decipher, but there are some efforts, made by people like, this Kalyan Raman in South India. I think, they are making some efforts, but still we are not really made any major breakthrough. We are not really finding a starting point, in fact, for, deciphering this particular script. At this stage, we have only 3 different hypotheses. Some scholars say that maybe Harappans had, Dravidian script and Dravidian language. Some say that maybe they had different, maybe some kind of Indo-European script and language. And in 2005, this 3 Americans published one paper, and they said that Harappans were illiterate. They did not have any language system at all. They did not have script. So these are only the hypotheses, and every group has given why they have this particular hypothesis. But still, unless Minalji, you are right, unless we really decipher the script, perhaps a lot of information cannot be revealed, because we have some limitations, in fact, on the archaeological data and also on various other sources that are found, in fact, associated with the archaeological data. So unless we decipher the script, perhaps we will not be able to understand maybe some features by which we cannot really understand only by archaeological records.
I think we are coming to the end of this process. We have this is almost 8 o'clock. So let me bring this to a close and hand it back to Ushaji to maybe bring this to a close.
Meenal, I think it is your turn. Before
yes,
that, I just want to ask, I'm very tempted to ask one question. Sir, you talked about Balatal, and I participated in one season. At that time, they were saying that it was a feeder culture to the Harappan civilization. Is that so?
Sorry.
No, Balatal was, when I participated in one of the seasons.
Yes.
And at that time, they said that this was a feeder culture to the Harappan civilization. What is your comment on that?
No. As I said that earlier, that earlier it was thought that the Ahar culture originated because of the influence coming from the Harappan region.
Mm-hmm.
That was the earlier view. But now, at Balatal also and Gilun also, we found the early phase of the Chalcolithic phase in that part. That means this culture was also maybe originating separately, independently in that part. And around maybe 2500 BC, then they developed contact with the Harappans. And then we find a lot of maybe ideas flowing between Harappans and the the Chalcolithic phase in that region. So now it has become clear that there was a distinctly identified culture in the Mewar part of Rajasthan, and they coexisted with the early Harappan phase at some time, and also with the mature Harappan phase also.
Thank you, sir. Meenal, over to you.
So it remains for me to, on behalf of the Asiatic Society of Mumbai, I thank you, Professor Shinde, for the erudite lecture you have delivered just now. You have thrown new light on a complex and intriguing issue. It has been an intellectually enlightening and enriching experience for us. We have learned a lot. Thank you for all the slides that you showed us. They were really fascinating. Shri Sanyal, a grateful thanks to you for presiding at this important lecture and also for your contribution, your learned remarks and comments. We know that you are both an economist and a historian, and we have benefited greatly from you and also in the course of the engaging discussion that followed Professor Shinde's lecture. So I think we will need to listen to all this yet again. Fortunately, we have a recording, and I know that we will listen in again and again. And so thank you ever so much. Very grateful to you. I also thank the audience for their participation and interest, and to Dr. Usha Vijay Lakshmi, our Honorary Secretary. A special thanks for getting in touch with Professor Shinde and for the technical support that she continuously provides for our online lectures. And I think we can call it a day now. Yeah, what do you say?
Thank you all and good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank
Good night.
you. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
Thank you.
Namaskar.
Namaskar. Namaskar.
Namaskar.